welcome to a brand new season of Radio with Pictures with Family Pacific and Fem Talk 89 FM, in conversation with diverse rural women leaders, members of the LBT network and disability rights activists. I'm Nandini Vandana and thank you for tuning in. We've just concluded our second national consultation for 2018, and this week the focus has been on disability rights and what do we need to know when it comes to disability rights. Joining us in this episode we have Bonita Ngio, representing the Pacific Rainbow Advocacy Network based in Lautoka. Thank you, Bonita, for joining us today. We also have Neela Rao, and she is representing the Ra Nari Parishad. Thank you for joining us as well. And all the way from Nandi, we also welcome Roberta Chen, and she is representing the Fiji Disabled People's Federation. Thank you, Roberta. Kicking things straight off into the segment, over the last 2 days, we've had numerous discussions over what does it mean when we talk about preparedness when it comes to the cyclone season. We understand that the cyclone season is from November to April 2019. And what are some of your key messages that you would like to bring forward when it comes to communities accessing disaster risk reduction management and response information? We'll begin with Bonita.
Well, Nandini, something great about Winston was that we learned a lot of lessons, and these lessons were learned, some in a good way, some in a bad way. Some systems worked and some systems didn't work. I think what really needs to happen now, and what we learned from Winston was to localize the system, the structures that we have. And when we talk about preparedness, we really need to look into the community, how to really prepare a community. And this would mean that you need to prepare the community in organizing them like subcommittees like this. This is the best way to get the community prepared, because I see that it's also a gap in terms of preparedness. What DMO does and what the community does are two different things. Maybe they should work together now. Okay,
thank you, Bonita. What do you think of this, Neela?
I think there should be a lot of awareness in the community. Like as Bonita is saying, what we experienced during Cyclone Winston was that, like we get the warnings through the radio. Like that's the only mode which people rely on when the cyclone is approaching. But like what we noticed during Cyclone Winston was that though the warnings were given, but the people were too relaxed. They didn't prepare themselves. So I think like we have got a lot of women's clubs and other organizations. So if there could be a lot of awareness created through this, then the people will know like what is to be done. And the other thing is like I'm an advisory counselor, but what I have noticed is that we are never invited to the DSMEC committee meetings. Like when we attend these meetings, like we can prepare ourselves and then we can also inform our community, the community we are in charge of.
Thank you, Neela. Those are important points that you raised about inclusivity of women in those communities. Now, Roberta, what do we say are key priorities when it comes to communicating the issues facing the disability network?
Thank you. For us living with disabilities, we have like when Winston came, we weren't prepared, and we didn't know how to go about things, because Winston was just like category 5, and like everybody was in a rush that they were leaving people with elderly and disability out, so they were just like running for their own lives. But for preparing for Winston, for any disaster, we should have like proper evacuation centers, accessible and friendly to us people with disability.
Thank you, Roberta. Also, when we are talking about persons living with disability, do you think the current modes of media is accessible and inclusive?
It is, but like if to say, when we have no electricity and then we get our SMS through the mobile phone, then if we have no electricity, then our phone goes off too. So we have like no, but it is very good that it comes through the Viber SMS program.
So, but if you would not have a smartphone, then it would be
Yes,
again
yes,
difficult.
yeah.
In terms of receiving messages or updates from the Fiji Met office, is there a difficulty in terms of the modes of media?
I don't think we have any difficulties because most of the our radios go by battery as well. I mean, before any cyclone, we stock up the house or stock up before any cyclone disaster. But most of the time we go by mouth. You know, when we have no cyclone is coming, we tell the next person and prepare them for the disaster that's going to happen.
Bonita, what would you say would be your message when it comes to media being accessible and inclusive?
I think, media plays a very important role, and that is sharing of information. And preparedness, you need information. If you don't get the information, you won't prepare well, you don't know what to do. So it is important to tap into all the forms of media, whether mainstream media or community media. Use this, and this is what I mean when we localize the work that we do. Make it suit the community, and information sharing is something that will really get the community well prepared.
Okay. Thank you for the discussions, and that's a wrap for segment 1. We will now take a break, and when we come back for the next segment, we will be sharing what are the key recommendations when it comes to women participating in decision-making structures when it comes to disaster risk management mechanisms. Welcome back. In this segment, we will be looking at some of the challenges that are faced by diverse women in their communities to be included in disaster coordination processes. And we'll start with Roberta. When it comes to persons living with disability accessing decision-making spaces, especially in disaster coordination, what are some of the challenges that are faced?
We face the challenge of voicing out in trying to get messages over to, so that we can be secured and to and move to safe grounds in times of disaster and not be left out in society.
When it comes to committees that are coordinating for disaster, is it a challenge for persons living with disability to be included?
It's very much a challenge. It's because, like I said in the first bit, people, when you look at a disability person, you say, okay, he cannot do much, or she cannot do much, and so how can she talk? How can she say something? So they just get left out.
Yeah. And Bonita, what is it like for members of the LGBT network when it comes to participating in disaster coordination processes?
I think in terms of decision making, Neil, we are not in decision making process, but we are there on the ground distributing the relief work. If you look at Western Division, the main branch of distribution was Lautoka Red Cross, and majority of the volunteers were members of the LGBT community. So our input was just recognized at certain level, which is something which is our challenge. And I think they not only need to look at that, they need to look at our potential holistically, and we really need to sit on the table too and make this decision, because our community too are the ones being left out in the main community that's been affected, and we need them to be looked at, especially when the evacuation center doesn't work much for us. So we really need to be in those spaces.
What would you say would be one of the key barriers stopping this the LGBT network from participating?
I think now that we have seen the draft report of the DRR, key recommendations there are talking about gender inclusive. That is what needs to happen now. Maybe what we need to see is it being implemented on the ground and not just being there on the paper, but actually putting it into practice.
Neela Rao, you're an advisory counselor. What do you think are the barriers that are preventing women from being included in those processes?
The only thing which I notice is that, like I mentioned before, we are not invited to any of these DISMEC meetings. Like for me, I've been one advisory counselor for the last 3 years, but I haven't been invited to one of these meetings. Like when we are invited to these meetings, like we can talk on behalf of the women, like what are their needs, and like when they identify any evacuation center, they just tell the people to identify the schools to be the evacuation centers. But when the mothers go there with small kids, etc., like there is no facility for cooking or anything there. And then like they are faced with a lot of problem. Like they can spend the night, but they need to move with the requirements, like what they are going to sleep on. And if they've got small kids, then milk and other thing. If there is no hot water available, how will they prepare the milk formula and all those things? So I think if we are included in these committees, then we will be able to inform them or advise them accordingly. So though we are advisory counselors, like we look after the communities, but like we don't have any say in this planning and all those things.
Roberta, what would you say then is needed when it comes to strengthening capacity in for persons with disabilities to be included in disaster coordination processes?
What we need is proper REMs and proper information by the media, especially if we are not on the SMS weather watch, that we need proper information from the weather office and media through TV to guide us in how to go about to move ourselves to the evacuation center before any disaster happens.
Okay, so capacity in terms of having the resources available and then having the necessary infrastructure for persons living with disability to access those places of decision making. Thank you. Bonita, just before we conclude with this segment, what would you say would be the capacity needed in order to strengthen more participation by the LGBT community?
I think, Nandini, going back to lessons learned, looking at the community when they mobilized after Winston, it was the youths and the mothers that were moving around first thing in the morning. And then it was these people that were also there when they had to evacuate the village. So maybe these kind of people need to be trained how to take people with disability, how to carry them, how to control a wheelchair, things like this. It will really help the community prepare better, because not only we will take the people that are well, we'll also look at everyone that are there in the community, whether you're disabled, widow, single mother, pregnant mother. We really need to prepare the community now. And in terms of preparing DISMEC really need to recognize the system existing on the ground in the community. And that is, if they have their own disaster committee, they need to capacity build them, prepare them, how they'll collect their data, how will they recover from crisis like that, and all of that. Look at it holistically, preparedness, recovery, all of it.
While at the same time making sure that there is inclusion of diverse women in those communities.
Yes.
Thank you. Stay tuned, because we will be continuing the conversations in our next segment. Thank you, and this is our last segment with Radio with Pictures for this episode, and we're looking at what is needed when it comes to safety and security of diverse women, including persons living with disability and the LGBT network, when it comes to accessing disaster coordination processes such as evacuation centers. And we'll start with Bonita. What do you think are some measures that need to be taken in order that we are not compromising safety and security of women during disasters?
I think when we talk about safety and security, we need to ask the people, the LGBT, the people with disability themselves, what does it mean to them? What do they want? from there, then we'll know what needs to work out on the ground. If the evacuation center is not accessible, then what other options are there? If they can erect their own evacuation center, then maybe that's something that works for them. Because you know, some of these people, they'll find it hard to go up the mountain to the schools to have all of this evacuation center, but it'll be easier for them to have their own evacuation center, which they know that has everything they want and would meet the needs, the specific need, and that is what's more important that needs to happen.
At a time when we would consider evacuation center to be the safest place, would you agree with me in saying that it would be safe?
I think it's not probably the safest place from my experience. We've had reported case, not reported. There have been incidents that happen in evacuation center, sexual assault, abuse, all of these, and they were not reported during this incident.
Yes.
Because during times of crisis like this, the police officers, they are not in the police station, they're out on the field. So when cases like this come up, there's no system in place where we can lodge our complaint, where we can get the perpetrators and get these people, you know, to task. But then we don't have a system like that in place. Everything is focused on disaster, but then there's another disaster in the middle of that kind of disaster.
Thank you. That is a really good and important point that you brought up. Nilara, was this the same when it came to these evacuation centers in Raki?
Yeah, like the schools which were used as evacuation center, all the schools were damaged. And I think like if people are sent to evacuation center, the government should make an effort to build one strong evacuation center, like where people will feel safe. And it should be fully equipped, like it should cater for the disabled people, the LGBTQ and all the people, like the single mothers, the mothers who go there with small kids and all that. So I think it should be fully equipped to cater for these people. And I think like women should be included at all levels of decision making, so that we can give our input there.
Thank you. Roberta, what do you say would be your key recommendations when it comes to compromisation of safety and security for persons living with disability?
Our key is to make sure that our members are safe, first of all, and in going to evacuation centers especially, it should be disability friendly and also accessible. Because most of the time when we go to a evacuation center, we have to, for people with the wheelchairs, they have to like climb up the stairs. And how can we climb up the stairs?
Yes.
It should be on a ground level and not on like on a mountain or stairs that we have to struggle to get ourselves up to onto the evacuation center.
Yes. So what would be one of your recommendations or Women's Weather Watch message?
To give us proper information and accurate, so that we can go from there of what, how, and to get trained people to help us in moving ourselves to the evacuation center.
Yes. Nilara, what would be your Women's Weather Watch message?
I think DISMAC should be more inclusive, and the other thing which I would like to say here is the Met should give accurate information. Like during Winston, we noticed was that like they were saying the cyclone will actually pass over Rikiriki maybe at 2 or 3 in the morning, but it was already on us at 4 in the afternoon. And like and then they were saying it will make landfall at about 7:30. Well, the cyclone was already on us. So I think the language which they used should be more simple for the lay people to understand, and the information should be very accurate for us to know what's going on.
Thank you. Bonita?
Well, for me, I think the Women's Weather Watch platform for feminine is something that works best, because the community receives information in their own language, in the way they want it to be received. And not only that, it's also a system where the community gives feedback to Family Weather Watch on the updates that's happening on the ground, what's the intensity like, and systems like that works best because we communicate to and from the area and whatever is happening on the ground.
Okay, thank you. When it just lastly, when it comes to safety and security for persons in the LGBT network, we've also had conversations where it was mentioned that over the last 2 days that then because of the discrimination and stigma that are faced at evacuation centers and the violence that you talked about, most of the members of the community from the LGBT community do not access the evacuation centers. What would be your message to stakeholders then?
I think my message to stakeholders is the key recommendation of the SDG: leave no one behind. If you have a system in place during disaster, accommodate those that are left behind and include them in the system. Just that.
Thank you. And so that's our episode of Radio with Pictures for today. Thank you, Bonita, Roberta, and Nila for joining us on this episode of Radio with Pictures. Don't forget, you can continue to follow the conversation via our Twitter handle at FemLinkPacific, or log on to our Facebook page. And of course, by tuning into FemTalk 89 FM in Suva and in Lambasa. Until the next time, thanks for your company and bye for now.